Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a highly focused, objective look at a geopolitical sequence that has literally sent shockwaves around the globe. The Middle East is like this incredibly complex web of alliances, red lines, and rapidly shifting dynamics. And on June 7th, well, that web vibrated intensely. We're going to strictly map out exactly what happened, why it happened, and what it actually means for the region, completely driven by the facts, the data, and statements from the key players involved. So let's get right into it.
Section 1, Missiles Targeting Israel. Let's look at the June 7th escalation.
Okay, let's dive into this. 11. Now, that's not just a random statistic. It represents the exact count of ballistic missiles fired by Iran directly at Israel. And according to the Israeli Defense Forces, these weren't just launched all at once. Nope, they came in 3 distinct, incredibly tense waves. Just imagine the sudden escalation there, the sirens, the immediate activation of military protocols. This absolutely wasn't a minor skirmish. It was a highly calculated ballistic missile launch. And to truly grasp the sheer weight of those 11 missiles, we really have to look at the broader context. This event marks the very first direct missile strike from Iran onto Israeli territory since the April 8th ceasefire was brokered with the United States. Think about that for a second. For weeks, we had this fragile, carefully negotiated pause in direct hostilities. Then on June 7th, that pause was abruptly and aggressively shattered. The timeline of relative calm was basically broken in an instant.
Let's ground this in some specific tactical facts, straight from reports from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC. Their stated target was the Ramat David Air Base. To put that on the map, it's situated about 20 kilometers southeast of Haifa. Now, this operation was directly commanded by the IRGC, and crucially, their stated motivation was crystal clear. They framed this strictly as a retaliation for a preceding Israeli strike on Lebanon. So it wasn't just random, it was a direct response in a very volatile tit-for-tat dynamic.
Moving on to Section 2, the Beirut catalyst. What actually triggered the retaliation? We started with that April 8th ceasefire, right? A real moment of diplomatic success. But then, completely disrupting that calm, is the Israeli strike on Beirut. This right here is the critical action-reaction loop. That strike in Lebanon is the exact pivot point that directly leads us to the June 7th missile launch. The diplomatic timeline we just talked about was effectively hijacked by military action. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what occurred on the ground in Lebanon. The target of that preceding Israeli strike wasn't just anywhere. It was a designated Hezbollah command center located right in the densely populated southern suburbs of Beirut. This is a well-known stronghold where Hezbollah concentrates its political and military apparatus. And the human impact, as reported by the Lebanese Health Ministry, was immediate: 2 dead and 20 injured. Now, let's flip over to Iran's perspective on that Beirut strike. The Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, which is the absolute highest command center of Iran's armed forces, issued this incredibly severe statement. They declared that Israel had crossed all red lines. You have to remember, Hezbollah is a heavily Iranian-backed force. They're a key ally in the region. So attacking their stronghold prompted Iran's top military brass to aggressively demand that Tel Aviv halt all operations in Lebanon. Basically, the strike on Beirut was viewed in Tehran not just as an attack on a friend, but as a direct challenge to their own regional red lines. Section 3, Air Defense Interception. Let's break down Israel's immediate defense and reaction. I want to walk you through the Israeli Defense Forces' exact sequence of events that night. First, their systems detected the 3 distinct waves of launches we discussed earlier. Second, the Israeli Air Defense Network, which, is widely recognized as one of the most advanced in the entire world, was immediately engaged to meet the incoming threats. And third, the result? All 11 missiles were successfully intercepted. The absolute most crucial takeaway from this sequence is that, despite the ballistic nature of the attack, there were 0 casualties reported. The defense network literally did exactly what it was engineered to do. However, that lack of casualties didn't exactly soften the rhetoric. Look at this stark warning from the IRGC that immediately followed the launch. They stated, "Tonight's operation is a warning," but it's the second half of that quote that really turns up the geopolitical temperature. They said, "If aggression is repeated, retaliatory measures will be broader and encompass all U.S.-Israeli targets in the region." They explicitly broadened the scope of potential future targets to include American assets. That is huge. Now, what's really interesting about this is how, in immediate juxtaposition to Iran's threats, Israeli officials completely defied the warning. They stated, plain and simple, that Iran had committed a grave mistake. So we're looking at 2 heavily armed nations staring each other down, both using the absolute strongest language possible. It represents an intense, high-stakes standoff where neither side is backing down rhetorically. That brings us to Section 4, U.S. intervention efforts, the diplomatic scramble. To understand why the U.S. got pulled into this so incredibly quickly, we have to look at what we're calling the green light accusation. Iranian parliament speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf publicly claimed that the United States had given Israel the green light, the go-ahead basically, to conduct that initial strike on Beirut. And because of this alleged complicity, Ghalibaf declared that American bases and assets in the Middle East were now legitimate targets. This political rhetoric drastically expanded the scope of the tension, pulling Washington directly into the crosshairs of the conflict. The U.S. response was incredibly swift. According to an interview with Axios, U.S. President Donald Trump reacted to the escalating situation with a very clear directive. He stated, "Israel and Iran have both struck. We don't need another hit." His immediate, explicitly stated intention was to break the cycle of retaliation right then and there. He was trying to slam the brakes on any further military escalation. At the exact same hour, two highly divergent approaches emerged, perfectly highlighting the extreme tension of the moment. On one hand, you have Israeli military readiness. IDF commander Eyal Zamir publicly stated that Israeli forces were ready to strike Iran the moment the order was given. On the other hand, you've got this massive U.S. diplomatic push. Axios reported that President Trump was urgently on the phone with Prime Minister Netanyahu, specifically urging him against retaliation. So you literally have the military prepped and ready to strike, while diplomacy is just racing against the clock to prevent it. Finally, Section 5, risks to peace, the broader geopolitical fallout. So, the crucial point is that the overarching complication here is clear. Iran has drawn a hard line in the sand. Their strict demand is that any broader diplomatic deal with Washington absolutely must include an end to the fighting in Lebanon. This clearly demonstrates how deeply intertwined these theaters of conflict have become. You simply cannot solve the tensions with Iran without addressing Lebanon, and you can't address Lebanon without navigating Israel's security concerns. It is a massive, incredibly delicate diplomatic puzzle. Which leaves us with this final, really vital thought. According to the AFP news agency, this latest strike by Iran severely diminishes the hopes for achieving long-term peace in the region, especially as current negotiation efforts appear to be stalling out. So we have to ask, with missiles flying, rhetoric hardening, and negotiations stalling, is the window for peace in the Middle East closing? It's a precarious future, and one that absolutely requires our focused attention to understand. Thank you so much for walking through the facts with me on this explainer. I really hope this helped clarify a highly complex situation. See you next time.